Hi Booktube. Today I'm going to do a video on how I read so much and why I'm able to read so many books and so fast. Basically, the most important thing is just a love of books. I think that's the most important skill or the most important aspect of reading is if you love books, everything else will fall into place after that. If you just have a love of reading, then you'll discover what type of reader you are, how to read what types of books, what type of books you want to read, what type of books give you that feeling, and you'll just develop so much more as a reader. And the knowledge and the comprehension, applying what you've learned, all of that will all fall into place after that love of reading. And that's it. So basically, all of these books, I've read them all differently, and I've had different levels of comprehension from them, and I've read them in different ways. The first stack is these ones. These were my history textbooks. I don't have a political background, so a lot of the information was really new to me. So the result is reading it was exceedingly slow, and it took me a long time to get through them all. But I'm really glad to have read them because the information is just indispensable. It's just, I have to keep these books, and the knowledge is so important. So basically how I read is it's hard to see, but I just highlighted in them, and I just basically read them. I read them like normal, but my comprehension level was like a skimming, which was okay because, again, like I said, I don't have a lot of background in this content. So I just skimmed, I read, but I was basically just skimming for the key point, what I felt was really important. And then I went back a second time and I reread it, and I improved my comprehension the second time around. And if there's something that was really far out of my knowledge base, I would research what it meant, like what they were looking for, but not always, because this was actually a little bit too high for my reading level. So it's just I just have the basic comprehension of it, and it was a university textbook, so you have a lot to read, so it's impossible to read for 100% comprehension in university. They just give you so much information so fast. So basically, that's it. Just use a highlighter and a pencil for this style of book if it's outside of your comprehension level. And then I did the same thing with this one. I haven't finished reading it because it has so many facts, so many names and dates, because it's a history textbook. And it's basically 1,000 years of Korean history squished into 400 pages. So it's just so-and-so did this, so-and-so did that, so-and-so did this, and blah, blah, blah. So the only thing I really got out of it was just the Korean Buddhism and the history of Buddhism, and the Tripitaka and the Hansa Temple. And yeah, and I highlighted in it. So it's more of a reference book than a reading book, but I do want to read it cover to cover at some point. I'm working on it. I have 100 pages left out of 400. This one was a really fast read because I already have the linguistic background, so it was basically like reading a novel to me, because a lot of it I already knew, so a lot of it is just a reminder or review. One chapter near the back was really slow and dense to me because it's biology, and it's like evolutionary biology, which I'm not like familiar with. So that took a long time because I don't have the background in it. But once you develop a background in something, the reading will become much faster and your comprehension is much higher because you're no longer reading outside of your comprehension level. Yeah, so it will be a lot faster. And like this one, for example, the first time I read Plato, it took me a long time. The very first time, it took me about half an hour to do one page because the sentence structure was really difficult. It was really twisted or really compact. And by hunkering down and taking the time, I can read this philosophy much faster. It's a lot faster to me because I'm more familiar with the way that this translator does Plato's dialogues in translation. And yeah, so I mean, the more you read of a certain author, you'll get familiar with their word choice and their sentence structure, and you almost learn their language, like their writing language, and then your comprehension is much faster once you become familiar with a single author, regardless who they are. And that's the case especially with this one. The first time when I started reading this one, it took me a long time. One, because it's ancient philosophy, was the beginning of the book, and I was getting familiar with how Anthony Kenny writes his how he writes, and he also put in a lot of examples for the ancient philosophers, and there's a lot of them to go through at the very beginning. And but as I went along, it got faster and faster for me, and I highlighted the key points in it, so that way when I go back and reread it, I can kind of focus in on what was attractive to me the first time around, and pull out more information from it. So the more you reread, the better your comprehension is. It just takes a long time the first time around for really dense books like this. And then the superficial, I want to read these ones the first time around just for a superficial enjoyment of them. If you have a Latin professor, or if you have a professor or teacher, just a 90-year-old man, they're going to tell you that these are slow reads, take a long time, read them with a dictionary. If you can learn Latin, that would be really good. But I disagree with that. I really strongly disagree with that. Again, it goes back to that love of reading. If you love a book so much that you could read it the first time superficially and just develop that love for it, and then that will motivate you to maybe, if you like it enough, to want to reread it for a deeper understanding of it. But it's going to stem from that love of it. If you just don't love the book, then don't read it, because it's going to be painful and not enjoyable to reread it. And it's probably, you're going to get like an aversion to it. So it's probably better just to put it down and read it another time. Or if you have to for school, then just slog through it and just do it. But and maybe later you can develop an appreciation for it. But basically, I really strongly believe that it's okay to read, especially legendary works like these, superficially, just to develop an appreciation for them, and then later go back and reread them for a deeper understanding. That's exactly what I did with this one. Like, I read this one, how many hours? Probably, I don't know, not many hours, maybe 6 hours, I would say, at the most, which is obscenely fast for a poetry book. But I just read it just superficially to enjoy the language and the beauty of the writing, and that's it. It just gave me a sense that I want to read more of him, and I want to collect his works, and I want to give them the respect that they deserve and read them more respectfully. So then this one is a good example of that. This one I gave that deep reading to, and obviously I pulled way more out of it the second time around. I'll show you this one, for example. The Doorstep. There's 25 words there at the most, but I pulled all of that out of it, and like every page is like that, because I mean, I just read this one over and over and over again, and with this book I can apply maybe this one to it, or maybe some Plato stuff to it, or even George Orwell. I could read it with the philosophy from the Neverending Story, and I can compare it to different works and read it in a different light the second or third time around. So it's going to be a little bit of a fast read to do it that way, or more reflecting and less actual reading. Yeah, so that's that. And then also the way that you read the book will determine how fast you could read it. The first time that I read this, I was a teenager, and I hated it. I really, well, I was baffled and confused by it, I guess, would be a better way to say it. It wasn't one of my favorite books. I liked Hamlet way more, but this one, I guess it was okay. I thought he was kind of like really depressed and probably needed a lot of help and stuff. But then when I read it as a teacher, what I was looking for was 100% different than the first time around. And I liked it way more reading it with a different frame of mind. And it was much faster because I was reading it as an adult and I already knew the story. So it was really fast. And it's contemporary. So reading this, the reading ability that I developed from reading this made this style of reading really fast, because if I can untangle what this one is talking about, then it's really easy and fast to read contemporary books, and your reading ability and your comprehension ability just goes up with the more difficult books that you read. So when you come down, they're really fast. So if I read, for example, my Western philosophy book, and then if I read this one and then I pick this one up, it's going to be insanely fast because something in my mind is really high comprehension level. So when I was reading the Lord Byron, when I picked up Ulysses, I was just in the mood to read Ulysses because of this. I had finished my 50 pages for the day, and when I picked up Ulysses for the first time in like a month, it was something connected, and it was so fast to read Ulysses, and my comprehension of it was pretty good, and because it fit my mood. So I will plan my day's reading around anticipating that type of thing, where I'll either read like something really dense and then I'll step down and keep stepping down in the language difficulty of what I'm reading. So if something is really dense, I'll read that first and then I'll step down from there. Because if I try to go up, it's too difficult to do. It's like, I guess, same thing as weightlifting. If you do like 100 pounds of something and then you do 10 pounds, 10 pounds is really easy. It's basically like that. And then if this one was a psychological novel, which I'm a little bit familiar with from my poetry writing, like I'm used to something about that, where you're talking about the abstract stuff. I'm a little bit stronger with that than I am with history, for example. So reading this was like a little bit fast, I guess, but not always fast. So I just did a lot of the highlighting, the same as my political books, and just reviewed them. And then I'm going to reread it in a different translation. This is going to be much faster than the first time around because I already know the story and I'm familiar with it, and I'm also more familiar with Russian literature and the names. The first time around, the names really caught me, and I had a lot of trouble with them, but I'm more familiar with it. So the more you become familiar with the subject, the faster it's going to be, and that's probably why this one was a really slow, painfully slow read for me, and it took a lot of intensity in my reading time. It took way more reading time to read this than it would for this, for example, because there's so much Russian history tied in with this. So because I only read this one superficially the first time, all I wanted to get, I decided, what do I want to get out of this book? Once I discovered the writing style is really difficult. And I decided I just want to get the main plot, and I want to follow one or two characters only. The other characters, I'll just kind of shuffle them off to the side and leave them for a second or third reading. So I'm only going to focus on these two characters and how they relate to each other. And the rest of it is okay if I don't understand it. And so I don't mind doing that because I'm going to reread it again and again and again. And I'm not going to ever say that I understand 100% of this book and I'm the genius and expert of this book, because I'm not. I'm so not. And there's so much Russian history in this that completely went right over my head. And I actually had to watch both of the movies to just understand the basic plot line of this. So those kind of factors are going to make my reading really slow. And I'm okay with that. If I have to toss out some other books or extend the reading time and make this a 3 or 4 month read, then I have no problem with that. And I know the second time around, when I read it in a different translation, it's going to be much faster because I'm familiar with the story, and I will have read more Russian history and Russian literature by then, so it'll be more familiar to me. And yeah, this one, yeah, I don't know. I can keep talking. This one I got lots of. If you ever read this one, read it just for the enjoyment of the story the first time around. The second time, start looking into the philosophy, because this one is a rabbit hole and a half. This is every bit as dense philosophically as a philosophical novel or as a philosophy. Like, just pick up any philosophy treatise, and this one has every bit as much philosophy in it, I think, because of the way that he weaves it in is really subtle, but the more you look at it, and if you highlight, you can see the thread that he's developing through this book, and I think it's phenomenal. So the second or third time, you can read it really, really slowly and get lots and lots out of it. And yeah, this one I also read just superficially, just for the pure enjoyment of it. I didn't bother with any of the history, any of the who's who, because they're just local mayors and the guy that runs the shoe store, stuff like that. So just purely out of love of it. And I knew, how much I like this book. And I'm eager to reread it. It's something to look forward to that I know that I'm going to enjoy. And I know I'm going to enjoy it more the second or third time around. So I guess to give you a really quick summary, first thing, don't get too stressed out about anything. Just develop that love of reading and the love of whatever it is that you are reading. Don't be afraid to abandon works if you're not reading it for school or something. Because if you force yourself to read it, you may not have that genuine appreciation for it, and you're just doing a disservice to yourself and to the book that you're reading or the author that wrote the book. You can always pick it up later and come back to it later. Like this one, I came back to it like 20 years later when I had to teach it, and I really like this book. It's one of my favorite books. It's yeah. So yeah, I think it's totally okay to read superficially the first time around and just enjoy the book that you're reading, and then pick it up later and reread it and see what's different and improve your comprehension each time you read it. Or just read it the first time around and then immediately go back over and check over your notes and why it is the way it is. And step down in your reading. If you read a couple of different books at one time, read the difficult one first and then kind of gauge what type of reader you are. Do you want to go from nonfiction to a novel, nonfiction to philosophy, nonfiction to translated classic and then a contemporary novel, that kind of thing. Like, just try to find what type of reader you are. I found if I read 2 Russian books that I was not familiar with, Fathers and Sons and Dead Souls, I could not read those 2 at the same time. I could not start them at the same time. I had to delay one, finish one first, and then read the other one, because something was too similar in the writing style or something, and I couldn't separate them when I was reading them, so I had to physically separate the time that I'm reading them to be able to understand it. So sometimes it doesn't work to read 2 books at the same time. Like, I wouldn't recommend reading 2 of Plato's dialogues at the same time because they're too similar. It's too much to unpack, unless you're in university and you have no choice and you have to do that. So yeah, that's it. Okay, so leave any comments. If you have any questions, just let me know. If you agree or disagree with me, if you think I should slow down on my reading, if you want to try to read faster, you can. Yeah, that's all. Okay, thanks. Bye, BookTube.